The digital clock on Leo's bedside table flickered from 2:59 to 3 a.m. with a soft, mechanical click that sounded like a bone snapping. Leo's eyes snapped open. He didn't wake up slowly. He was thrust into consciousness as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. The air in his room felt heavy, tasting faintly of ozone and old, scorched popcorn. He sat up, reaching for the bedside lamp, but his hand met something cold, rubbery, and wet. He pulled back, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. When he finally found the switch and clicked it, the light that filled the room wasn't the warm yellow of his IKEA lamp. It was a pulsating neon violet that made the shadows in the corners of his room writhe like oil on water. His posters, once images of sleek cars and space nebulas, had transformed. The cars were now rusted wrecks driven by grinning skeletons, and the nebulas were swirling pits of eyes that blinked in unison whenever Leo looked away. Leo stepped out of bed, but his feet didn't hit the carpet. Instead, the floor felt like giant, squishy marshmallows. He looked down and saw that his floorboards had been replaced by a row of oversized yellowed piano keys. They groaned a dissonant minor chord with every step he took, the sound vibrating up through his shins and settling into his marrow. "Mom? Dad?" he called out. His voice sounded strange, echoing and distorted, as if he were shouting into a deep metal well. He opened his bedroom door, expecting the narrow hallway of their suburban colonial. Instead, he stared into a kaleidoscope of impossibly long corridors. The walls were covered in red and white striped wallpaper that seemed to be breathing, the stripes expanding and contracting like a rib cage. The hallway didn't stretch straight. It curved upward at an impossible angle, defying gravity, looping toward a ceiling that wasn't there. Dozens of doors lined the walls, but they weren't wooden. Some were made of giant playing cards, the ace of spades dripping black ink. Others were heavy iron grates leaking thick pink syrup that smelled of bubblegum and rot. Driven by a mix of terror and a bizarre, dreamlike compulsion, Leo followed the smell of burnt sugar and sawdust toward what should have been the living room. As he rounded the corner, the walls simply fell away. He wasn't in a house anymore. He was standing on a rickety wooden balcony suspended by fraying ropes over a colossal subterranean circus ring. The ceiling, where his parents' bedroom should have been, was a swirling vortex of black clouds and flickering, jagged spotlights. The sofa, the television, and the coffee table were gone. In their place sat a massive gold-leafed cage filled with lions. But these weren't ordinary beasts. They had human faces, faces that looked suspiciously like his neighbors from down the street. Mr. Henderson from next door, usually seen mowing his lawn, was now a manned predator pacing the cage, his human eyes wide with a feline hunger. Then he saw the clown. In the center of the ring, under a single harsh spotlight that cast a shadow long enough to reach Leo's feet, a figure stood 10 feet tall. It wore a suit made of mismatched patches of velvet, burlap, and what looked like human hair. Its limbs were far too long, bending at extra joints that crunched audibly in the oppressive silence of the room. The clown began to dance. It wasn't a joyful jig. It was a rhythmic, spasmodic series of contortions. With every leap, the clown's oversized floppy shoes hit the sawdust with the heavy, wet thud of a falling guillotine. As it spun, the bells on its pointed hat didn't jingle. They shrieked like tiny, tortured voices. The clown stopped abruptly and looked up. It had no eyes, only two glowing yellow light bulbs screwed directly into its fleshy sockets. It pulled a long, jagged needle from its sleeve, threaded with a strand of shimmering silver wire. It began sewing the air, stitching together the shadows to form a three-dimensional shape. As the clown worked, the silhouette became clearer. A boy, small and trembling, holding his breath on a balcony. It was the shape of Leo. Terrified, Leo spun around and ran back through the shifting hallway. He ducked into the archway that led to the kitchen, hoping to find a phone or a weapon, but the horror only intensified. The kitchen had transformed into a mad scientist's gallery of curiosities. The refrigerator was no longer a stainless steel appliance. It was a towering glass tank filled with glowing green brine. Inside, instead of milk and eggs, dozens of clockwork dolls floated, their porcelain eyes blinking in perfect synchronization, their tiny gears grinding a metallic rhythm. The dining table was no longer wood. It was a single, massive, muscular tongue that flicked out periodically to catch flies that were actually small, winged alarm clocks buzzing around the room. Each time a clock was caught, it let out a muffled ring before being swallowed into the fleshy depths of the table. "This isn't real," Leo whispered, his knuckles white as he gripped the counter, which felt like cold, damp, pebbled skin. "I'm still asleep. It's just the 3 a.m. delirium. I'll wake up and it'll be morning." "Is it?" A voice rasped from the corner. Leo turned, his breath hitching. Sitting in his father's usual chair was a creature with the body of a man but the head of a giant, unblinking owl. Its feathers were gray and matted with grease. It was wearing his father's favorite best dad ever bathrobe. The fabric stretched tight over its broad, feathered shoulders. The creature held a cup of steaming liquid that smelled like old copper pennies and swamp water. "The show is about to start, Leo." The owl man hooted softly, the sound vibrating in Leo's chest. "The audience is waiting. You shouldn't be late for your own premiere. It's bad manners to keep the shadows waiting." Leo bolted. He didn't know where he was going, but he ran toward the back door, his feet slapping against the piano key floor, which wailed in a frantic crescendo. When he burst through the door, he didn't find the backyard or the swing set. He found himself in a forest of mirrors that stretched into infinity. Everywhere he looked, there were reflections. But they weren't his reflection. In one mirror, he saw himself as an old man with weeping, milky eyes and skin like parchment. In another, he was a hollowed-out skeleton dressed in his favorite striped pajamas. In a third, he was a wooden marionette, his jaw hinged with silver pins and thick hemp ropes pulling his arms upward toward a dark, unseen puppeteer. The mirrors began to close in, the heavy glass panels sliding across the floor with a screeching sound that felt like a needle scratching a record. The reflections started to scream, a silent, pressed against the glass kind of scream that made the air vibrate. Leo realized then that the funhouse wasn't just surrounding him. It was trying to claim him. He felt his skin becoming waxy and cold, his joints beginning to stiffen like molded plastic. His heart, once racing, began to beat with a slow, mechanical clack, clack, clack. Leo saw a tiny, normal-looking door at the far end of the mirror maze. It was painted white with a small brass handle. His own bedroom door. It looked like a life raft in a sea of nightmares. He lunged for it, his fingers brushing the cold metal of the handle just as a giant gloved hand reached out from a mirror on his left and grabbed his ankle. The glove was stained with grease and something darker. It was the clown. It had crawled through the reflections, its light bulb eyes glowing with an intense, buzzing heat. "Stay a while," the clown giggled, the sound like breaking glass in a trash compactor. "The world is much more colorful this way. Why go back to the gray? Why go back to the boring?" Leo kicked with all his might, his heel connecting with the clown's right light bulb eye. The bulb shattered with a sharp pop and a shower of purple sparks that smelled of ozone. The grip on his ankle loosened, and Leo scrambled through the door, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt with a frantic strength he didn't know he possessed. He collapsed against the wood, gasping for air, his lungs burning. Slowly, the neon violet light began to bleed out of the room. The smell of sawdust and burnt sugar evaporated, replaced by the mundane, comforting scent of laundry detergent and dust. The floor felt like carpet again. Soft, static-filled, and still. The dissonant music of the piano keys died away into the hum of the air conditioner. He looked at his clock. 3:01 a.m. Only 1 minute had passed. Leo let out a jagged sob of relief. He crawled back into bed, his limbs shaking so hard he could barely pull the covers up to his chin. It was just a night terror, he told himself. A vivid, horrible hallucination brought on by a fever, or maybe that horror movie he shouldn't have watched. He reached over to turn off the lamp, wanting to hide in the darkness of the real world. As he did, he noticed something resting on his nightstand that hadn't been there before. It was a small red foam nose, wet with a single drop of neon purple liquid. And next to it, written in his own distinctive messy handwriting on a piece of notebook paper, were the words, "See you at 3 a.m. tomorrow, Leo. We still have to finish the suit. The thread is already under your skin." Leo looked down at his arms. Under the sleeves of his pajamas, his skin was no longer tan. It was beginning to turn a bright, permanent porcelain white, and when he flexed his wrist, he heard the faint, unmistakable sound of a wooden joint creaking.